All right. How's it going, everybody? Just wanted to do a presentation or do a video on some short game talk. I know it's been quite a bit of conversation around this stuff recently, and it's something that I've been thinking about for a very long time. I kind of jokingly named this slide here "A Lifelong Professional Obsession" because that's what it's been. Honestly, like I've been trying to search for these answers all the way back to right when I got in the golf business, when I was in PGM program in 2008 range. So this is kind of like uh, an amalgamation of those 15, 16 years of different information that I've heard and things that I've explored myself. And definitely a shout out here to a lot of different people that I've gotten this information from. TrackMan for sure. I used to work for TrackMan, so Frederick and the guys there at TrackMan have were kind of the first to really push this conversation along, as far as I'm aware of, at least, about trying to measure this stuff. And we'll get more into that in the future. Ping for sure, like you'll see a lot of these slides are from Ping and Ping studies. They've been incredible, not only with like being willing to actually look at these questions, but then also willing to share the information. I think is kind of incredible, and kudos to them for sure. So Paul and Eric and Marty and Chris and everybody else at Ping, looking for the answers to these questions is really cool. Definitely learned a lot from Andrew Rice and through Coach Camp, and there's been several presentations there on this topic. Open forum, Nick Cherotok's event at this PGA show. There's been several talks there about it. Obviously, listening to Joe Mayo as well, like, hey, he's really pushed the conversation along, and asked a lot of questions that are really cool, and it's made me think over the past couple of years on a lot of these topics, maybe a little bit differently than I have in the past too. So, been really cool, honestly, to kind of see some of that. But I mean, my kind of journey through this conversation started probably way back in about 2009ish. I was an intern at a place called the Honors Course, and it was really the first time I had significant time on TrackMan. I think I'd hit on TrackMan maybe two or three times before that at a previous place that I worked at, but I didn't really spend time on it. And at the Honors, it's golf only, so like, hey, as an intern, we lived on property. We had a little dorm above the cart barn, and so at night I would just go down and mess around on TrackMan and start to figure things out. And at that time, this was like TrackMan 2 we had at that moment. So the software at that time just had like one little wedge game, but I kind of got obsessed with it, like trying to hit 60-yard shots and get them close to the target. And figuring some things out there from like a player's feel standpoint to be able to accomplish that, and started to really look into and notice like, hey, the ball is launching at around 30 degrees. It's kind of interesting when I was performing the best. So that was kind of where it started. I went to a TrackMan University seminar, and one of the breakout sessions that we had was basically we were trying to create the most amount of spin in a shot that doesn't travel any further than 60 yards. We even put like water on it just to see what would happen too, like water on the ball, water on the face, to see what would happen. And that was kind of my first uh, really thought about the friction of it. And then through that session, we even put like sand all in the face because, hey, we've always heard that saying, like, after you hit a bunker shot, don't clean your grooves because the next one's going to come out super spinny. It's definitely something that happens, and you could get more spin with it occasionally. I don't think I really understood why then. Maybe I understand why now, but it was definitely kind of interesting. So worked at the Honors. It also had Zoysia at the Honors. The fairways were all Zoysia, and that was the first place I'd ever hit off Zoysia before. And for whatever reason, off of Zoysia, you can hit some like really crazy spinny shots. Probably because it's a little bit like a mat, like a pretty thick blade, and the ball's sitting up. And if you get down grain, I mean, you're just not getting much grass or matter in between the ball and the face. So again, started to explore like, hey, why are these like crazy low spin shots coming out with a 60-degree wedge? So pretty cool. I ended up going to work for TrackMan probably in about 2014, and started to run a lot of those TrackMan university seminars. Would do the same tests, and really started to kind of look into it more. This was right around the time that Frederick and the guys at TrackMan kind of put out the theory of the spin loft mountain, and it was like a great first step. Like, it's the first thing I'd ever heard of. Like, hey, there's this point in time where maybe if you continue to increase the spin loft, you get diminishing returns on it. Turns out now we kind of know that maybe it wasn't quite the theoretical 45 degrees that they kind of had put out there, but it was like a great first step into kind of understanding friction essentially. And then I think I saw at a top 100 summit, Paul Wood give a presentation on actually trying to quantify friction in wedges, and it was very early on in this conversation, but it was pretty cool. So that got my brain kind of running through it as well. And now fast forward to 2025, and I'm at Birdwood Golf Course, UVA's home course, and super fortunate to have an incredible short game facility. There's 4 greens, big wide area, multiple different kinds of grasses. We can hit off of zoysia, we can hit off of bent, we can hit off of Bermuda. You can get different lies and grains and stuff like that. And so it's a really cool place to kind of test some of this stuff out and this new kind of conversation. The other advancement over the years has definitely been the technology. Like TrackMan, back when I first started using TrackMan 2, wasn't great at measuring spin loft hardly at all on any wedge shots. TrackMan 3E got a little bit better. That would have been like 2013 range, I think, 2012 range, somewhere around there. And then TrackMan 4, 2016 range, really started to get good at actually being able to measure spin loft with partial wedge shots and even some chip shots. So I think that's where we really started to like dive into it more and like actually getting data on, hey, this is what the spin loft is, and here's kind of the friction that we're getting. So anyway, I just kind of wanted to give that overview of like the background and the how long I've been thinking about this, and this is not something that just kind of put together. But the way my brain works is, in order to kind of formulate my philosophy or my opinions on it, I like putting it on paper. And so I decided to basically do a presentation. Have no clue if this will ever go anywhere. I may post it, I may not. May do it at one day at a presentation of some kind if I'm ever lucky enough to. But wanted to kind of put down some of my thoughts and some of the things that I've seen throughout the years around this conversation. So first question is like, hey, well, what affects spin? All right, and just kind of going through the different things is like, all right, speed, obviously, like the faster the club head speed, then generally speaking, we're going to get more spin. Spin loft is absolutely a big deal. Like, hey, if you're hitting a driver, you're going to be hitting up on it. You're going to have pretty little loft, 10, 11 degrees. That spin loft's going to be sometimes, for me, as low as 8, 9 degrees. And so, therefore, we're not getting as much spin, right? Even though the speed is pretty high. So that one would be a big factor. And definitely where the spin loft is pointed will change, that launch, that land angle, and of course the rollout on the green. And that's what I kind of want to get at here, moving forward and continuing to push this conversation forward. And then friction, like, hey, tricky to kind of quantify, but the simplest way I think about it is just like hitting out of wet grass versus hitting off of a dry mat. We've all experienced that before where, hey, off of wet grass, the ball will float like right up the face and just come out launching really high, low spin, and reacts really differently when you hit off of a mat. You can hit some really spinny shots. So what is friction? I think that's definitely a question. The way I think about it is just like the relationship of how closely the ball starts towards the path, right? So the higher the friction, the more it's going to start towards the path. We know, like, hey, with driver, the ball is basically starting 90% towards the face in that range, and with irons, like 75-ish%. But wedges, sometimes you can get as low as 60%, so 40% towards the face. So a lot higher friction going on there, and can be pretty cool, right? So you can definitely get more of those. The weird thing about friction, this is a graph from a ping presentation, I think, at a coach camp, if I remember correctly. But that, like, friction will do different things, or excuse me, with different clubs at different spin lofts, right? So I can't exactly remember this graph, but essentially I think this is more like a 4-iron spin loft, this blue one here. And it can do some different stuff, like depending on the actual environment. So you can get some really weird things happen with friction, and Ping's done some really cool stuff on this, understanding what actually happens. So it's pretty cool. So like this is I believe this is the wet friction, excuse me. I think I said that wrong. And then if you get down here into spin lofts of, let's see here, kind of more down here, it's going to start to launch a little bit differently than if you have spin lofts really high or really low, right? So it's going to react quite a bit differently, which is pretty cool. like, okay, next would be like what affects friction. So definitely spin left, wedge type. So like ping has the hydrophobicity face, like that's going to absolutely affect the friction, and that's something they put a lot of stock into and a lot of research into to help with that. And if you haven't tried it before, definitely go try it. It's pretty crazy. Off of wet lies, the ping wedges definitely retain their spin a lot better. Golf ball, of course, like Pro V1 versus a range ball, or even Pro V1 versus Pro VX, you can definitely get some different stuff there. And then, of course, just matter between the ball and the face, water, grass, dirt, etc. Any of that stuff. Speed, definitely. Like at speed, the friction is actually at lower speeds. The friction is actually more, which is kind of interesting. And then, of course, the type of surface that we're hitting off of, the grass type, the grain, if it's a mat, etc., like Zoysia versus tight, wet, into the grain Bermuda, will probably have some differences there. Like one thing I always like to talk about, like what are grooves for? They're for dispersing matter, right? To get that grass moisture out of the way. If you had a perfect lie and you wanted the most friction, in other words, like off of a mat, you'd probably actually want to use a wedge with no grooves. Obviously, we don't play golf in perfect lies, and there's pretty much always going to be some sort of matter between the ball and the face, so we need grooves for that reason. And an analogy there you can think of is F1 tires, right? When it's nice and dry, they use the slicks. When it's a little bit wet, use the inter tires, and then when it's super wet, they use the actual wet tires that probably have bigger grooves on them for that water to go somewhere. Why do we want friction in short game? So like best players in the world tend to launch the ball around 30 degrees ish or less. Like, hey, it's kind of a zone, right? It's like rarely, this is a data from Ping. Paul Wood was presenting this on Mark Emelman's podcast. This is where I stole this from. And you can see like, hey, most of the shots are in like this 30 degree-ish range, like 34 to 25 range, like rarely lower than that, rarely higher than that. That tends to be kind of a nice window. And without friction, it'd be fairly difficult to achieve that with like a 60-degree wedge. So there's something going on there to kind of help with that. Obviously, spin's often very necessary to try and stop the ball on the green. Short-sided, firm greens, super fast, landing on downslope, whatever you want to say. And you could argue maybe that the ball in the air versus rolling is potentially more predictable. So if I can get the ball to stop really quickly, then I can fly it closer to my target and get the ball to stop sooner, so I don't have to worry about reading the green or break or things like that. So obviously, like 10 down has been a huge part of this conversation. And again, like props to Joe for pushing this along. It's really opened up the conversation, and it's probably part of the reason why Ping has done a lot of this research, is because he's been asking the questions and he's seen a lot of things happen with Victor by doing this and a lot of his players, and I think it's pretty darn cool. So this is just a video from Adam Young here, basically describing like, hey, if we're more in the shallow, kind of letting the loft go, you can obviously see there that the matter is more likely to get in between the ball and the face. Versus if we catch the ball earlier, hey, less likely to get matter in between the ball and the face. This idea has been around for a really long time. It's where the idea of like pinch it comes from, right? When you were a kid and you heard, hey, I want to really pinch the ball to get some spin on it, right? I think that's a similar kind of thing that we've heard. So that's kind of the pros. It definitely lowers the launch angle, and there's a little bit of room for error, if you want to call it that, by being 10 down with having less leading edge interaction, like less skulls. You have more room for the leading edge to actually get underneath the center of the golf ball to be able to hit less skulls. So that can definitely happen. And then, of course, out of certain lies, it's definitely that I've seen, like, hey, grainy lies, wet, etc. It could be a good way to solve the problem in those kind of ways, in those kind of situations. Here's kind of two different shots. So this is Victor. This is from Joe's
here.
Instagram.
Nope. Haven't had any contact yet.
This is Victor hitting a shot.
That was first contact with the ball.
Kind of
so
clearly
this
see
is
there's not much matter
here.
getting in between the ball and face.
It's got exit.
Pretty cool little video.
Still
here.
going down.
Phantom camera mount.
Yeah.
No help.
Yeah, that club starts coming out of the ground pretty quickly.
Really
cool.
quick.
Really cool to see.
So you could say that he's quite steep. Low point is quite forward, but he gets the club away from the earth rapidly.
Yes.
Again.
So that's kind of one way to do it. And then here's me hitting a shot off of a green. And this would be more of like, quote unquote, the shallow way. But clearly you'll be able to see here that the club touches the ground quite a bit before the ball. So hey, off of a nice tight lie, when there's no matter in between it, theoretically that shot's going to be pretty predictable. That club's starting to hit the ground, I don't know, 3-4 inches behind the ball. Pretty crazy, right? It was a good shot, like obviously super clip, not much grass in between it. It was spinny, all that kind of stuff. Okay, some other kind of like 10 down potential benefits is there's some spin loft mountain advantage. So this graph again is from Ping. I think this was from Coach Camp, Andrew Rice a couple years ago. And like if you notice, you're in kind of this like 55-degree spin loft range. Then basically you have range, you have like room for error on either side if you happen to screw it up a little bit, where it's not really going to change the predicted friction under a dry fairway lie. And let's keep that in mind for a second. So it could be a good constraint for the other like 10 down potential here is it could be a good constraint. Like most people that hit chunks, the low point's either too low or too far back. So by getting them to get the low point more forward, they're going to hit less chunks. So it can be like a good constraint, even if they're not actually 10 down, feeling like the low point's more forward, they're probably going to start hitting better shots. And also, hey, the ball flight tends to be lower because, hey, the path or the attack angle absolutely can affect, especially in these high friction kind of situations, how high the ball is going to launch. So some of the questions that I have, does 10 down actually cause more friction? That's a big question. I can buy that, hey, if there's less matter between the ball and the club, then maybe there could be more friction. But that's definitely something that I have a question on. And then the big one is like, what is the effect on the rollout of the two options? Or like stopping power of the ball? Because that's really what we're trying to get at is, can I predictably stop this ball? Can I make a prediction, and can I match that prediction to the outcome? Can I hit multiple shots over and over and over again and get similar launch and spin and ball speed, land angle, all of that to be able to control where my golf ball stops? Like, hey, if I lower the spin by X amount, the ball will roll out by X amount. These are things that I kind of want to figure out. Like, hey, if I have 1,000 less RPMs or 500 less RPMs, everything else stays the same, how much more is the ball going to roll out? Or the land angle as well. Like if I decrease the land angle or increase the land angle, keeping spin the same, is that going to change? How much is that going to change how much the ball rolls out? So which one has a greater effect would be kind of the third question. Like, hey, if I change land angle, does that have more of an effect than changing spin? Okay, so those are kind of questions that I have. So I did a little test. I've done this many, many, many times. This is by no means research, just to be super duper clear. It is a test. A little bit of pet peeve of mine is when golf instructors call this research just because they have technology. It's not research. This is not scientific. I didn't do some crazy big study that guys like Ping or Sasho or Dr. Kwan or any of those guys did. I just simply took myself and hit 10 shots, same club, trying to be 10 down, and then trying to be quote unquote more shallow on the other 10. I was trying to hit it 30 yards, kind of stock shot. You can see the average carry for the two was 26 and 27. And I was just trying to envision hitting to a 30-yard pin, flat green, no trouble, none of that stuff, like pin in the middle. This is all indoors off of a mat, just to be clear. I was not outside because there's 6 inches of snow on the ground right now, and I didn't have that opportunity. The spin is measured here because I was using an RCT ball. Titleist makes a ball specific for TrackMan that has a little metal Y in it that actually measures the spin every time. And of course, I was using TrackMan 4. And here's kind of the averages of the two. So you can see I definitely averaged 10 down, a little more than 10 down, and spin loft was about 55. Okay. Spin rate on the 10 down was a little bit higher. Okay, 6,400 versus 6,100. And then the second line here is kind of like my stock. I averaged about 6 down. And you can see that spin loft was probably more in the 50-degree range, which is typically kind of normal for me. You can definitely see the launch angle with mine, it's 28. The launch angle with the 10 down is more in the 25 range. And we'll come back to some of this as well too. Here's all of the shots here. I'll put this in, if I post this, I'll put this in the comments as well so you can look at the actual data, the raw data. something I would love to see more of, like people just showing raw data of shots like this. It's pretty cool. I mean, like, interesting to note, a couple of mine when I'm hitting stock were like 9 down, but a couple of them were also like 2 and 3 down. And to be totally honest with you, they didn't feel that difference. Okay, like I didn't really notice a difference in the feeling of impact between a 9 down and a 3 down. So something's going on there. So a couple insights from this little test that I did. Spin was definitely higher on the 10 down, 6,400 versus 6,172. However, if we actually look at, if you notice, the speed was it was not very different, but it was 2.5 miles an hour different, I believe. So I just kind of equaled out the actual spin per mile an hour. So for the stock shot, I had about 150 RPMs per mile an hour, and the 10 down, I had about 147 RPMs per mile an hour. So if you equal those out, they're pretty darn similar. Not a lot of difference there, right? And I think the main difference there, as we talked about in the beginning, was that, hey, the spin was mostly created more through, in this particular test, the speed. Okay, and because I'm 10 down and the spin loss higher, in order to get a ball to travel 30 yards ish, I need to add more club head speed. So something to keep in mind. I kind of used something I made up on my own, like friction percentage. So basically, I just did the math here. Hopefully, the math is correct because my math understanding is probably high school level. But just kind of ran the numbers real quick, and basically this is describing how much the path influenced the launch angle, or the attack angle, excuse me, influenced the launch angle. And with 10 down, it was 31%, and with my stock one, which was about 6 down, it was 32%. So the higher the number here, the more friction, in other words. So basically the same. A stock was maybe a little bit higher. The land angle spin differences, like I really want to know what would this do and equate to in ball rollout distance. So the land angle with my stock one, the less down version, was 3.2 degrees steeper, but it was also 231 RPMs less. So like my question is, which one of those wins out, or does it even matter? That is definitely my question. The ball speed, super interesting, was basically dead the same, 0.2 miles per hour difference. Okay, again, because I'm trying to hit a shot that goes 30 yards. So something to think about as we continue to go. And ultimately, that's what I want to know. Would steeper land angle overcome the loss of spin? I don't know. Something I would love for Ping to research next, and they probably will. All right, so here's the Ping study. I saw this from various social media places and Mark Emmelman's podcast. Kind of hard to see here a little bit, but you can see that the blue bars, kind of royal blue, are the 15-yard chip shots. So for Tour Pros, they were 5.3 down. This is at the ball, by the way, just to be very clear. With a 30-yard shot, they were about 6.4 degrees down. On my stock one, I was 6.5, by the way. And then on the 80 yards, they were about 8.3 degrees down at the ball. Now, what's interesting, this one is at the ground contact. You can kind of see on all these shots, they're in like the 6, 7, 8 degree range, no matter the handicap level here. So at the ground contact, they're all pretty similar. At the ball, they're very different. In other words, better players are getting the attack angle to be delivered to the ball, not to the ground. Okay, not as good players are hitting behind it. Essentially, like the low point is either too far back or too low, so they're hitting the ground too soon. Okay, yeah, for sure. And in the study, they measured that, hey, almost everybody touches the ground a little bit before the ball, and that's why you're seeing on these 15-yard chip shots that even though their attack angle at the ground was 7.5, the actual Tour Pro attack angle at the ball was only like 5. Okay. And here's kind of the variability of it, right? You're seeing different variability in these shots. Like this is the attack angle at the ball, and this is the attack angle at the ground. So, hey, most players are actually pretty consistent delivering the club. It's just sometimes the ball is not quite in the right location. Or you could say another way, the low point's not quite in the right location. It's not that the actual swing or the attack angle is changing. It's where the circle is in space that is changing. Spin loft here again. Tour Pros, I think, was averaging, trying to see this, around 55 degrees. So kind of interesting. Pretty similar to what Joe says. This one is fascinating, and this is what I really want to get at here too. So this was the optimal ball speed for different shots. So 15-yard shots, 30-yard shots, 60-yard shots. It seems to me, so this part of the graph is measuring how far the ball ended up from the hole, and this part of the graph is measuring the ball speed. So in other words, the balls that ended up close to the hole had very specific ball speeds. Okay, we go to the 30-yard shot, zoomed in, it was 38 miles an hour. Interestingly enough, on my test, and I did this test before I saw this information, promise you. If you notice, both of those ball speeds on the 10 down and the stock one was 38 miles an hour. Okay, so interesting. Here's what I was talking about here. 38.4 on the 10 down, 38.1 on the stock. So both of these, I was solving the problem to get the ball to go a certain distance. Didn't really necessarily correlate exactly with club head speed. Okay, and again, it makes sense. When I have higher spin loft, less energy is going to the golf ball, i.e. smash factor is lower. Therefore, I have to swing faster. Okay, therefore, spin is a little bit more. And again, here's ping study is here. Not as clear when we're just looking at club head speed. I mean, you can look at some of these for the 30-yard shots. There's one player in here that's swinging it, I don't know, like 23, 4 miles an hour, and the ball speed, the ball ended up close to the hole. So in other words, the ball speed was probably around 38 versus somebody else over here swinging at 45-ish miles an hour, and the ball speed was about 38. Like, how different are those smash factors? Like 1.5, basically hitting, or even higher, basically hitting a putter, to probably 0.75, something like that. So again, these all represent in my head different spin lofts. Low spin loft, high spin loft. What's king is probably ball speed. That's the thing that we probably need to be able to control. So to answer my question maybe from earlier, maybe spin and launch in and of itself is not as big of a deal as the ball speed is. Maybe we just need consistent spin and launch, and then really train our players on how to create an intended ball speed. So some of the things that 10 down that I have some other questions on are, hey, like, yeah, it makes a lot of sense when we're in these like really nice conditions hitting off of a mat or in nice lies that, yeah, I have a lot of room here on either side of the mountain, so to speak, in this range, where if I mess up a little bit from the spin loft, I don't deliver quite the same loft or quite the same attack angle, I still going to have a shot that comes out pretty similar. But when we start living at this 55 degrees and I start to get into, let's say, a wet condition, which would be this yellow line, there's a pretty darn big difference between those two. So now the predictability of this shot, quite a bit different. We're losing 1,000-ish, maybe even more RPMs, versus, hey, what if I stuck over here at 50? Yeah, now I'm only at 5,000 RPMs, but when I get a little wet in there, I don't know, I'm losing only 300-400 RPMs. Interesting, right? Hey, when we get grass in between the face, i.e. rough, it doesn't really matter. It's always going to be pretty different. But in these like wet situations, or maybe a little bit of grass in between the ball and the face, if I stuck over here at 50, maybe I don't get quite as big of a difference in the outcome of the shots. Maybe. That's just pure theory there, just to be clear. Shot top, like, hey, with 10 down, like, essentially you saw the ball was coming out at like 25 degrees with mine. That's pretty low. Like, I mean, again, the range there typically in that ping study was like 25 to 34. So that's kind of on the bottom end. So like, how many shots on course do we actually need to hit 25-degree launch? I don't know. That's going to affect land angle, right? How much is that going to affect rollout? I don't know. Maybe it just matters about the ball speed. And then, of course, like sometimes the misinterpretation of the 10 down stuff. This is by no means Joe or anybody else's fault that's teaching 10 down, but I've had players that come to me trying to get 10 down, and all they're doing is just shoving the handle under the ground. That's not at all what Joe's saying, but that it would be a way to get to 10 down. And again, I think the ping study where they were showing the graph, where it showed that, hey, pretty much everybody's already 10 down at the ground for the most part. 8 maybe is maybe where it was. It's just that, hey, they're hitting the ground a little too soon. So that would be in favor of Joe. Like, let's get him moving the low point more forward, maybe by doing what he likes to do and kind of moving the center of mass a little forward in the backswing. And sometimes this intent of getting 10 down can mess up some of the rhythm of the chipping stroke as well. I see that quite a bit. Like, they're trying to shove the handle forward again. Not anybody's fault that's teaching this 10 down properly, but that can sometimes happen. So that was the end of my little diatribe here. Hopefully it made sense. Sorry if I went on a little too long, but just wanted to put that in perspective and share it. And yeah, let me know if you have any thoughts. Thanks.